Hey, whether you know it or not, I've told you this before, and I'm going to pay you this compliment again. You are an expert at storytelling. And maybe it doesn't roll off your tongue super smoothly. Maybe you're not the best, most articulate movie critic, but you have consumed so much story that your brain, your innermost parts of your brain, your subconscious even, knows the difference between good storytelling and bad storytelling. If a character is unrelatable, you just intuit that. If the pacing of a story isn't right, something feels off to you. And maybe sometimes you look at these things and you can even technically point to what isn't working about the story at any given time with a story that doesn't work. This is just one of those things that you get good at when you've been around it for a long time. And what have you been around more than stories? Well, one of the things you've probably noticed, or at least intuited about the way good stories work, is that almost all of them that follow a main character from point A to point Z of the story start out by getting us, the audience, familiarized with the character and the character's environment and the character's circumstances in the early going. And then, at about the 15% mark, we get a sense of what the character is going to be doing. The Gospel of Matthew works the same way. At about the 15% mark, we have a sense of what the kingdom is and that Jesus is apparently a king of some sort, and he's going to make a kingdom of some sort, and people are invited somehow, and it has values that are different, but it's really hard to conceptualize at this point. But there's your call to action. There's your now we know what's going on here part of the story. Usually, by about the 20-25% mark, you start to get a pretty good sense of what the problem is going to be, who the bad guy, the enemy, the antagonist is going to be, and you start to develop more questions about how this main character is going to turn out. You realize that there's more to learn. There's more depth to this main character who you've got a surfacey look at so far. And as those two questions progress, the development of the character or demonstration of the character of the main character, coupled with the antagonists getting more grouchy, usually around the 1/3 mark of a story, will get you to the place that we call ratcheting tension. And by we call it that, I mean, I just use that term and I don't know if it's the actual term, but this is where your tension ratchets up. This is where you realize that who the character is you're following is on this unmissable, impossible to dismiss collision course with the antagonists. They want competing things. They're doing different stuff, fire and ice. This just cannot work out without some kind of conflict and some kind of resolution. And that's exactly what we're getting in the book of Matthew. Now you think about it, after we get the whole expression of what Jesus is up to at roughly the 15% mark with the Sermon on the Mount, the introduction of the kingdom, all of that business, then we start wondering, well, what kind of king is this? Okay, we know that there were other people claiming to be messiahs or religious leaders. I mean, heck, even John the Baptist was floating around out there at this point. How is Jesus different? What is unique about his claim in all of this? And then you get into Matthew chapter 8, you're off the Sermon on the Mount. People are tagging along because they're interested and they're excited about this. We still don't know what the deal is going to be. And then they go out in a boat, the disciples and Jesus is like, well, just going to stop the storm there. It's too much of the storming. Everybody's freaking out. So he just barks at the storm and it just quits. And then the disciples are like, okay, what exactly are we dealing with here? Even the winds and the waves obey him. This is both freaky and interesting. And then in the very next anecdote, a bunch of demons are like, hey, what do you want with us, Son of God? And Jesus is like, zip it. And so we get this little blurt out, this little moment where we're like, whoa, we just learned something much bigger about the main character we're following. Well, we didn't know him quite as well as we thought. Son of God? He didn't deny that, did he? Carl, did you see any? Did you catch that? Did he deny the Son of God thing? Because it more just sounded like he kind of hand waved it and kept going. Okay, I'm going to put a pin in that one, the whole Son of God thing, because that has implications. And then we move into chapter 9, and the tension ratchets up even more as this question of who Jesus is ratchets up even more. Remember, the beginning of chapter 9, Jesus comes along and he's like, hey, there's a paralytic guy. I'm going to heal the paralytic guy. And instead of saying you're healed, he leads by saying, take heart, son, your sins are forgiven. And then you'll recall the religious leaders who we're starting to figure out are going to be the antagonists, the bad guys in this thing. Like, what? You can't forgive sins because, they're like, well, only God can forgive sins. Well, that's the third straight anecdote where the question of who Jesus is and what is his actual position have come up. The demons rightly identified him as the Son of God, according to the text. And now, inadvertently, the Pharisees, the teachers of the law, or whoever was there griping about things, I don't remember, I think it was the Pharisees, they do the same thing, inadvertently point out that he is doing something that only God can do. So Jesus' popularity in Matthew chapter 9 is at an all-time high here, but the Pharisees keep getting grouchier about things. Jesus hangs out with Matthew and his prostitute drinking tax collector buddies, and that doesn't go over very well. And then you got a problem with Pharisees and fasting and why aren't you doing stuff the right way? And then Jesus has physical contact with a lady just in passing who is unclean ceremonially because of a bleeding disorder. People aren't going to be happy about that. Then at the end of chapter 9, you get this imagery about the blind being able to see, but the people who theoretically can see are actually blind. And then immediately after that, the blind, metaphorically, people are mad because they're saying Jesus is driving out demons by the authority of demons. And chapter 9 is a gigantic ratcheting up in tension. Chapter 10 gives us a little bit of a break as Jesus sends out his disciples with this message. But we come back in chapter 11 and things still really haven't improved even after this breather and this change of scenery, because it looks like John is wobbling. And if he's not wobbling, it looks like his disciples are wobbling. And they're the only ones who are in play at this point anyway, because John is in prison. And, well, as we know, ultimately facing death, he was never going to get out. So Jesus just lost his wingman, his hype man. Now he's going to be completely on his own. And the people that John left behind, I don't know if he trained them all that well. They don't seem to be getting it. So Jesus has to explain to his own cousin's disciples, like, I don't know, go back and tell them that all the things that are supposed to happen when the kingdom is here, like all those things are happening. And then he turns around to the crowd. He's like, yeah, and you guys, what are you laughing at with John? He was awesome and he was great, but I'll tell you who's not, this generation. We got a problem going on here. There's no way to please a bunch of you guys. And then he goes ahead into the passage we looked at last week and was like, in fact, hey, I'm just going to call you guys out. The 3 towns where I've spent most of my time, Chorazin, Bethsaida, Capernaum, you guys are a mess. You're missing the point completely. Well, these people were very under the influence of the very religious leaders who are now starting to jump out as the antagonists in the story on a collision course with a Jesus who we still don't have crystal clear answers at this point in Matthew 11 as to who exactly he is. And it feels like if we get any more clarity on who he is, and it's not the answer that the Pharisees want, that this tension is going to ratchet up even further. So you get denouncement of people and statement of woes in the middle of chapter 11. Then you get the denunciation of Bethsaida, Chorazin, and Capernaum. And then finally, we get a breather that we looked at yesterday. At that time, Jesus said, Matthew 11:25, I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you've hidden these things from the wise and learned and revealed them to little children. Yes, Father, for this was your good pleasure. One, this harkens back to the theme we were introduced to at the end of chapter 9, where the blind can see, but those who see are actually blind. God is opening the eyes of the unimpressive little street urchins, but the really impressive fancy people, they can't see it. They can't get it. It's been hidden from them. The second thing of note, as Jesus strikes this positive tone in the midst of ratcheting tension, is that apparently there were some good results that came out of the big open world quest of Matthew chapter 10 that the disciples went on, because it says, and revealed them to little children. Then, hey, if Jesus is saying you've revealed it to some little children, it means that there were individuals in Bethsaida and Chorazin and Capernaum who obviously were tracking with this. Somebody in the subreddit asked the other day, and I didn't get to the question in the mailbag episode because I spent all my time working on that jingle. Somebody was asking, like, so was Jesus pronouncing judgment like everybody in these towns is just doomed and condemned and damned? I don't read it that way, in part because of reason and common sense, in part because we know people from Capernaum did follow Jesus and did get it, and in part because of this little turn of a phrase right here in Matthew that indicates that it was revealed that this stuff did click with some people coming off of this open world quest. But the third thing that really stands out to me about this little remark that we spent a bunch of time on yesterday is that twice Jesus uses the language of Father, and it kind of sounds personal. It sounds like he's not just throwing this out again, but every time this Father term comes up, it seems like he means it. And we still have that thing lingering in the back of our minds from the end of chapter 8 where the demons were like, I'll tell you who that guy is. That guy right there, that's the Son of God. Like, were they right? Did they mean that? Now, you and I have heard that term, Son of God, so many times that maybe at this point it almost feels like a throwaway line. Like it's just religious lingo that people say. But the implications of that phrase are pretty significant. Well, maybe we'll get some clarity here in verse 27. All things have been committed to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and those to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. Okay, wow. If I'm reading this right, and the original audience who was coming upon this for the first time, they must have been even more staggered than you and I who've heard this term a lot. But if I'm reading this right, Jesus is throwing down the gauntlet right here. He is taking us all the way into downtown Ratcheting Tensionville because he's saying, yeah, the demon's right. I'm the Son of God. That's exactly who I am. God, who you all worship, he is my Father, and I am his Son, and we are one and the same. And if you've seen him, you've seen me, and vice versa. Dang, that claim is gigantic, and there ain't no coming back from it. You say something like that, you're either completely nuts and need to be dismissed for being totally out of your gourd, or if you can back that up, I guess all of the history of planet Earth is going to pivot on your brief time in this world and will even create a whole new epoch of time because the change that you are about to bring about on planet Earth is going to be gigantic. And well, it would appear that he was not out of his gourd and that it is the latter. But we're out of time. So we're going to break down this Son of God claim tomorrow in light of just how tense this situation is getting at this moment where Jesus drops the Son of God bomb. Mas mañana. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.